I think I'm safe in saying that employment is probably the most difficult issue that most homesteaders will face. We've known many people who made the move to the country and faced a lot of difficulties with finding work. We certainly did. But it doesn't have to be that stressful. In order to have this kind of a non-stressful experience, you're going to have to do your homework ahead of time, and you're going to have to prepare accordingly. So here's the deal. So many people focus on where they're going and the land and power and water and all that, but they fail to consider the troublesome issue of income. And, they say, oh, well, we'll find a job when we get there. I was mentioning this earlier, but this is so important. And unfortunately, it's not that easy. The kind of locations that many of us are wanting to move to may also be economically depressed areas, and certainly lower population areas where there are fewer jobs to be had. Or perhaps the type of occupation that we are trained for is not one that's feasible to do in our new location. So I hope you can see the extreme importance of calculating your work into the equation when you are working on your move. It's just as important as having water and trees and privacy and all these other things that we're talking about. Without work, you're not going to be staying at your new homestead very long, unless you're independently wealthy. So here are some thoughts that I'd like to share with you after having connected with thousands of folks who are interested in making this move. So what I would suggest, if at all possible, that you focus on is your current occupation. Because this is what you are knowledgeable about. This is what you're highly skilled at. This is what you're trained for. This is where your connections are. And if there's any way that you can continue doing this occupation from your new location, I would by all means try and do that. Unless there's some other reason why you can't or don't want to continue doing that occupation, please do yourself a big favor. You've got a lot of big issues going on in your life. There's a lot of things happening. And why would you add an additional huge stressor to this equation unless you have to? So do yourself a big favor, eliminate that stress, and try and continue doing your same occupation. Maybe you'd have to find a new employer, but if you can at least keep doing the same thing, that's going to make it a lot less stressful. Another thing that I would mention is to not rule out the option of continuing to do your current job with your current employer, but doing it remotely. Now, certain jobs that's just not possible, but certain jobs it might be. And just be willing to think outside the box. We had a friend who did IT and payroll for a corporation. And it was an office job. She had to go in every day to the office. And so when she and her family moved several hours away, she naturally turned in her resignation because that wasn't going to be an option anymore. But her company considered her such a good employee that they offered to keep her on and let her work remotely. In fact, they even ran a special line into her new house and her new location. And they did all of this just with the understanding that she might have to do a little bit of travel every few months, something like that. So my point is, think outside the box and don't be afraid to ask. You never know. And what's the worst that they could say? No, that's the worst. So, don't rule out your current job. But if you do rule that out and you see that that's just not going to be an option, then the next step, I would say, in this process would be to look at a previous occupation that you may have done in the past, or if you don't have any of those or none of those are an option, then maybe even a hobby. I'm just looking for something that you've got some past experience with and maybe some connections. Maybe you've already got some tools for that so that you don't have to completely retool. You've got training and you know the ropes a little. That's what I'm looking for, is I don't want to see you reinvent the wheel and create all kinds of stress unless you absolutely have to. And so that would be what I would suggest, is if you can't make your current occupation work, then try and find something that you've done in the past and see if you can't make that work. And no, maybe it's not ideal, but at least it's a bridge to give you an income at your new location. And then if you want to, you can transition to something else gradually once you've moved to your new location. But an example of this that comes to my mind is a friend of ours who is a dental hygienist, and she had a hobby, where she found that there was a real need for making a certain product. And so she started making those to fill that need, and she would just do it in her time off. She was still working full-time, and there got to be such a demand for her product that she was making on the side that she had to scale back her full-time employment to part-time, I believe. And then before long, her side business, that was a little hobby that had grown into a side business, now grew to demand so much of her time that she had to quit her main employment, and now she had a home business that she could do from home. But it was a gradual transition. It wasn't a cold turkey thing. And so what I'm really recommending for you is don't just say, oh, yes, I could do XYZ, or I used to do XYZ, and just quit your job and start doing whatever that new job is or previous job that you did was. I would recommend, if at all possible, trying to make a gradual transition so you can test the waters and make sure this is going to work before you eliminate your main stream of income. Just use some wisdom here. Now, if none of those are an option, then, and only then, would I consider looking at an occupation that you have never done before. Much of the same cautions that I've already described would apply here, except that you should be even more cautious when moving towards a brand new occupation that you don't have any experience with. And I would suggest that you choose an occupation that will not require extensive or expensive training. And don't forget to answer one of the most unasked questions, and that is there a real demand or a need for this service or product? You can't just assume that there's a need or a demand for it. You need evidence of that demand. Otherwise, you could spend months or years preparing for a business that nobody or very few people need or want. Another caution that I would give you is to be aware that just because a particular niche has very little competition doesn't mean that it's an ideal thing. I used to think that. I used to think that when I was looking for a niche business, that if I searched and I couldn't find anybody else doing that, or maybe just one other person doing that, that meant that this was the perfect thing because I'd have no competition. But the fact of the matter is that if there is no other competition, then that most likely means that there is very little, if any, demand for it. And so really, you're looking for something that there is competition, that there's enough demand for it, that you do have competition, but you don't want so much competition that there's just a huge glut of competition in the field. So it's kind of a fine balance there. And, I would also remember what I mentioned earlier about working remotely. More and more businesses are hiring employees that work remotely, either most of the time or all of the time remotely. And so that's an excellent option where you can, as long as you have a good internet connection and a phone line, then you can work remotely. So just be aware of options like this and get creative. But be sure that you consider your personality when you're looking at the possibility of working remotely. Some people really thrive on having face-to-face contact with lots of other people. And if that's you, then working remotely from home might not be a good fit. Maybe you need to look in another direction. But if you are the type of personality that fits with, then great, go for it. Now, a word about online businesses. The internet presents some incredible opportunities for connecting with customers all over the country and even all over the world. But there are a few cautions that I want to mention, having started a couple of online-based businesses myself. First, if you build a website, they will not necessarily come. That's a myth that I know probably nobody actually says it in these words, But I think a lot of people have the idea that if they just build a website, people are just going to magically appear or something like that. And that's just not the way that it happens. A website is just like a catalog or a flyer. It does no good unless you get it into somebody's hands and get a customer to look at it. And that is where a lot of the work in internet marketing, originates. It's getting visitors and qualified prospects or leads to your website and connecting with them in a meaningful way. So yes, trying to rank in a search engine is wonderful and it can bring you some great free traffic, but organic traffic from search engines is just too fickle to count on without a staff that's dedicated to making that happen. So I suggest that you make paid advertising an important part of your business plan. And, if you have to, you've got to do it wisely though, because if you're not careful and if you don't have your ducks in a row where you're advertising carefully and where you've got a good way to connect with people once they've gotten to your website, you could very quickly go into the hole, because it does you no good, little to no good, just to get people to that website unless you meaningfully connect with them and are able to build a relationship and eventually a business relationship with them. So that's what I would say, is that this is a huge topic, and I couldn't begin to do it justice in this little section here. But I would encourage you to get some good training on this topic, and to just prove the concept before you depend upon it. Make sure that this is actually going to fly. Make sure that people are interested in this topic and that you're going to be able to get the visitors to the website and the sales and all of this. Prove the concept before you depend upon it would be my word. And then a word about network marketing, because some of you might be thinking of this as a possible way of making money. Many of these MLMs are a waste of time, because you end up working yourself crazy just to earn a bunch of money for some uplines and for the company executives. We know of folks who have attained very high status. They've worked with almost superhuman effort and in their particular MLM. And even after all of that, they're top producers and everything, but even after all of that, they still have to have a day job just to pay the bills at the end of the month. So you might wonder why anyone would get sucked into such an arrangement. And I think the reason why is because there are some advantages to network marketing and MLMs, because the company is taking care of pretty much all of the business end of things and leaving you free to connect with potential customers and to offer support to them as well. And so they're taking care of the back end stuff, the website, the fulfillment of the product, the manufacturing of the product, all of that kind of stuff, even a lot of times taxes and things like that, they're taking care of. And you are freed up to do the front end stuff. In exchange for all that back end stuff, you're not making nearly as much as you would if it was your company. But it is a much less of a headache than owning your own business. And I can say that from experience. Owning and running your own company is a big headache. There's certainly some distinct advantages to it, but it is a big job and it's not something to be taken lightly. So I think that's one reason why a lot of people do this. And I would say that there are some legitimate MLMs out there. And one way that you can know if it's a legitimate MLM is if it is product-based, product-centric, where they have a high percentage of customers, where it's not just an opportunity that they're selling, where they're just trying to get a bunch of representatives or builders to sign up, but they actually have products that they are selling. And if that is the thrust of their business is products, then that gives the business much more stability and makes it a much more legitimate business opportunity for you, because it's not a Ponzi scheme if they are product centric. With a Ponzi scheme, it's where they are depending upon continually signing up new people in order to pay for the ones that are existing in the system. But with a legitimate company that's product based, it is, the company is based on the sale of products that would happen even if they weren't continually signing up new people. So that's one thing that I would look at: percentage of customers, and is it a product centric business? And one thing that I would say is the main difference between a legitimate MLM and a conventional company is that the MLM, instead of a large portion of their profits going to a huge distributor and middlemen, retailers and these kind of things, and then also another large chunk going to huge advertising firms and things like that, instead of all that money going to all these middlemen and distributors and all these kind of things, that money is going into the individuals, the representatives that are taking the place of those distributors and advertising agencies and all of this. Because the individual people, the single moms and the families doing this out of their home, they are now the distributor and the advertising for the company. And so it's just a different way of doing it. It's not some scammy thing. It's not, if it is a legitimate MLM, which I mentioned earlier, product centric and all of that, then all it's doing is, instead of sending a large portion of money going to these huge conglomerates, it's going to little people, which I kind of like that idea. And so we actually have found a MLM that fit with us well. Lisa is very involved in natural health solutions and things like that. It runs in her blood. And so we found one that was in the health-related niche, that was products that we already used, and the compensation plan is great. And those would be the two things that I would look at if you're interested in getting into network marketing. Is the compensation plan a good one? Are you going to be compensated fairly for your efforts? Go through it with a fine-tooth comb. I did that with a relative who was looking at network marketing years ago, and when we sat down and went through it, she was going to be making not much of anything. So go through the compensation plan, and if it's a good and fair compensation plan, and if you already use the products and they're awesome and you're really sold on them, then this may be a great fit for you. So, just keep an open mind that there are options out there. I'm not going to get into, this isn't the time or the place to getting into the details of what are involved, the one that we're involved in on the side. If you're interested, we'd be glad to talk to you about it. You're welcome to send us an email, or you can contact us through our website, susprep.com, and we'd be glad to share with you more information about it. But the point is, the principles here of looking for something that is legitimate, that is centered around the customer and selling products, has a good compensation plan, products that you already use and that are really high quality. You got all those, and it might be a great option for you.